Simple subdivision. What else can you do with a box? Number two, looking at my notes here, is floating, right? You can float boxes on top of one another. I'm going to draw a box here. Fan, fan, straight, fan, fan. And I'm going to draw a box beneath it. Fan that back, straight. Fanning, fanning, straight. Fanning, fanning. And I'm going to float a box. Maybe I'll rotate it a little bit. Straight. Straight. Fanning. Fanning. So how do I know that these boxes are floating? Because they look like they're floating, duh. But why do they look like they're floating? Because of these shapes right here. Those shapes, those little triangle shapes, those little V shapes, the V tells me I am floating. So that becomes important for the next thing that we want to do, which is stacking. Because we want to stack things on top of each other, which we do all the time. We want to be careful not to make them look like they're floating above one another. So let's go to stacking. So here's the third thing we can do with a box. Stacking. Similar to floating, but I avoid that little V shape. And then I am not floating, I'm stacking. See, this shape is a right angle. Right? If I were to carve into that, I'd create some V's. Now it's floating. But since it just goes right up and meets this line here, it's stacking. Let's put another box on here. Now we've stacked another box. Well, what is this? It could be anything. Could be some sort of box on a table. Could be, the roof entry to some sort of office building. All that has to do with scale. But the point is, this is how you stack things. Now here's a fun trick for rotating things in perspective, which is always something that gives people trouble. Say this is something that I feel like I need to do this all the time, is stack books on top of each other. And books, you don't want to stack them in like a one big block because it looks silly. Nobody stacks books like that. People stack books all kind of rotating at different angles, but that presents kind of a tricky perspective challenge. But here is a tip to help make it easier. Let's just make a real quick perspective grid here. Here I got my eye line. I got VP1, VP2. Let's draw some lines out from there. And let's draw a little box here. All right. Now here's an interesting observation that I didn't know. And when I learned this, I thought it was really cool. But see these sides of the box? They point to a vanishing point. Well, you remember what we did just a minute ago? We made a square. We made an X in the square, right? Let's try that. Let's do that again. Let's make an X here. What this does, this X also points to a vanishing point. This one is way off over here somewhere. What that means is if I want to draw a box that is related to this box, but at a different angle, I can use these vanishing points now. Let's use VP3, and VP4 is way over there that it will just kind of appear like this. There will be hardly any convergence to it at all. Let's try that. Let's see what that looks like. Using that vanishing point and this one way out in the distance. Let's try and draw another box. Gotta be careful not to use the grid that I made because I'm using different vanishing points now. Well, check it out. They appear to be on the same ground plane, but this one is rotated at about a 45-degree angle to what it was before, right? Because what I've essentially done is I've taken that box and I've just spinned it. So if I want to like stack things at these two vanishing points, let me make another vertical here. Let's use our original vanishing point. See, now this appears to be stacked on this, but at an angle. So that's a very helpful thing to know when it comes to trying to stack things organically, because sometimes you might not always want to stack things perfectly aligned. In fact, things don't usually happen that way in life. Like even now, as I'm talking to you, like my computer is at an angle from my desk. It's not perfectly lined up with my desk. So yeah, so something to be aware of, right? And if you're just sort of like sketching this, you're like, okay, well, let's make a stack of books here. Here's my first box, right? My VPs go out there somewhere. I make my X here. My vanishing point goes out there somewhere, and this one goes out there somewhere. So sort of roughly following those points, I can stack again. Right? And this is and maybe I want to do something that's somewhere in between. So I'm going to pull this vanishing point back up this way, and this one will be kind of out there a little bit. Actually, it would be the converter should be further out that way. Right. Now I am stacking books on top of one another. Maybe we'll put a glass up there because this guy reads a lot of books and throws his dirty dishes on top. So stacking, that's something we can do with a box. The fourth thing we can do with a box, we can cut a hole in the box. So let's make a box. This is really important for drawing things like windows, doors, and it really is important because a lot of students, they end up drawing these things looking very flat. They forget that you have to show dimension. Well, there's very few have-tos in drawing, actually. It all depends, if you're doing TV animation, sometimes they like a very flat graphic look. But you want to do it because you want to do it, not because you don't know how to do anything else. So I made an X, and now I'm just drawing straights and fanning lines in that X. And now I'm going to fan these lines out. There's a straight, a straight. Now I've cut a hole in a box. Right? Maybe I want to make this a little window. Maybe it's inside of a side of a house. So I'm gonna draw some like siding here. Pull that out. See how it feels like it fits in. And people don't realize that this is actually a very important shape right here. Right? That tells me that this thing is set in the side of something. It's not flat, it's not drawn on. This is where what we're doing here is we're using these things to interpret real life things. So instead of just like oh, I don't know, I saw a siding and there was a window in it, right? That looks pretty flat. This feels like it has form, has dimension. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about the fifth thing. The fifth and final thing we can do. Now let's do one more. Let's do one more, cut a hole in the box. Let's try another box here. You guys are probably getting sick of boxes by now, but they're important. Let's draw some lines. I'm going to make this box a little longer. And I'm going to put it on its own way. Well, no, I won't put it on its own layer, but I am going to move it over here. Draw my verticals up. Let's fan that line back. This line fans back that direction, so I'm going to fan that line back as well. Let's fan this line back. Now let's do a little bit of subdivision with cutting a hole. I'm going to cut off all of this chunk here. So I make my line, I fan it back in space. That's where it is supposed to be. So I connect it. Now all this can go away. Don't need it anymore. I'm gonna find the front edge of that face. I'm gonna draw a line that matches these lines here and fan that back, right? Now I'm gonna draw a curve. Let's do it from here to here. Now, where is that curve? There's the X right there. Now, I'm gonna look behind, draw this down, and that back. I'm not gonna worry about like being specific and matching the curve behind, just something roughly showing. You see, now I've created some sort of I don't know, bridge or tunnel, but at a slant, at an angle. So you can see how versatile some of these simple techniques really are. Put that guy over there. Okay, the fifth one is